The road to her village runs about 500 kilometers northeast out of Jomtien, and I made that drive in March of last year, in a rented pickup with the air conditioning on high and a box of gifts on the back seat. And somewhere past Nakhon Ratchasima, I started reciting Hal's list to myself. Hal is 79. He has lived in Jomtien since 2004, and in my first month in Thailand he sat me down at a plastic table with a chang in front of him, and told me, kindly, without any drama at all, the numbers. He said, "Most of the women you will meet who are working have between 2 and 5 men supporting them at any one time. And this is not cheating, it is diversification, and if you understood risk, you would admire it." He said, "The retirement she announces will last exactly as long as your money does, and she will not be lying to you when she announces it. She will mean it the way you mean a New Year's resolution." He said, "You will be told she has never done this before, and it will not be a lie either, because the sentence is doing different work than you think it is." And he said, "Last, the one that took me 4 years to understand, the men who get hurt are not the fools. The fools go home in 6 months. The men who get hurt are the smart ones, because a smart man can build a case for anything, and the first case he builds is the one that puts him outside the numbers." I was 70 years old on that road. I had spent 31 years as a process engineer at a chemical plant outside Toledo, Ohio, and I had, in the 4 years since Hal handed me those statistics, constructed an argument for my own exceptionalism, so thorough and so well supported that I could have defended it at a conference. My name is Wayne. That drive was where the argument came apart, and I want to tell you exactly how, and I want to tell you what she said on the way back, because she said the truest thing anybody has ever said to me. Let me get the man out of the way first, because he matters less than he thinks he does, which is the theme. Toledo, Ohio. 31 years at the same plant, running process control on a continuous chemical line. The work is exactly what it sounds like. You monitor a system that must not stop, you learn its failure modes, and when something drifts you find out why before it becomes a shutdown. I was good at it, I liked it, and it gave me a way of moving through the world that I have never been able to switch off. I noticed drift. My marriage ended in 2011 after 29 years, and I will not be discussing it beyond the fact that it ended reasonably and that my ex-wife is a decent person who deserved better attention than a man who could diagnose a pressure anomaly at 3 a.m. and could not tell you what his wife had been sad about all spring. My daughter Jenna is 44, in Columbus, and we talk about once a month, warmly, in the manner of two people who have agreed not to reopen anything. I retired in 2019 with about $340,000 and a Social Security payment of $2,180 a month, and after 18 months of Ohio winters in an empty house, I came to Thailand in October 2021, at the very tail of the border reopening, because a man from my plant had retired to Jomtien in 2016, and his Facebook photographs had a quality of ease in them that I had not personally felt since roughly 1994. Jomtien, if you have not been, is not what the videos of Pattaya suggest. It is a long beach with a long road behind it, and at 6 in the morning it belongs to old men doing Tai Chi badly, and Thai families running dogs and the fishing boats coming in. And I fell in love with that hour of that place in about a week. I rented a 1-bedroom on Pattaya Road for 12,000 baht. I found a coffee place. I found, more importantly, the plastic table where Hal holds court most afternoons, and Hal, a retired steelworker from Pennsylvania with a Thai wife of 19 years and the stillness of a man who has stopped needing to win conversations, gave me the statistics inside my first month, unprompted, the way a decent person hands you a torch when you walk into a dark room. I want to record here that he was not cynical when he said them. That is what threw me. I had expected the bitter old expat of legend, and instead got a man who described the entire system with something close to fondness, who said the women in it were among the most competent risk managers he had ever met, and who finished by saying that he hoped I would find something good, and that I should just, please, keep my eyes open while I did. And I said thank you, and I filed it under the heading of information which applies to other people. I met Ratri 11 weeks later, on Soi Buakhao, in a beer bar with a pool table, at 9 on a Thursday evening. That is the entire nightlife content of this story, and I am going to leave it at one sentence, because everything that mattered happened in daylight, and because the neon version of this genre has done enough damage. What I will say is that she was 33. She had been at that bar 4 months. She beat me at pool, without any apparent interest in whether I minded, and when I asked what she did before, she said she had worked in a plastics factory in Rayong for 6 years, and had left because the pay was 11,000 baht a month, and her son needed a school uniform every year, and a phone eventually, and there was no version of 11,000 baht that produced those things, plus her mother's diabetes medication. She said it flatly, without a bid for sympathy, the way you would state an operating constraint. I have thought about that flatness a great deal since. At the time I registered it as honesty. I now think it was honesty. That is the difficulty with this entire story. Almost every single thing I registered correctly. I simply drew the wrong conclusion from all of it, at speed, and with great confidence. Within 3 months we had a life, and it was a daytime life, which is the part I want on the record because it is what made the argument for my own exceptionalism so easy to build. She stopped working at the bar in March of 2022. We had breakfast most mornings at a place near Soi 5, where the woman knew our order. We went to the fresh market on Sundays, and she taught me the names of things and laughed at my tones for 3 years without ever once getting bored of it. She got me swimming again. I had not swum since Ohio, and she would sit on the sand with her phone while I did my slow laps, and she would be there when I came out, every time, with a towel. And if you are 70 years old and you have spent a decade coming out of the water to nobody, I would ask you not to be too quick with me about what that is worth. She nursed me through dengue in 2023, 8 days, and she slept in the chair. She learned that I do not like coriander. She remembered the date my mother died and said something about it, unprompted, in 2024, and I had to go and stand on the balcony. This was not a transaction that I mistook for a relationship. It was a relationship, and it also had a structure underneath it that I had been told about in month 1 and had decided did not apply, and both of those things were completely true at the same time for 3.5 years. I want to add 3 more things to that ledger of ordinary days, because ordinary days are what actually bind a man, and no one ever bothers to describe them. The first is that she was funny, not charming, funny, dry, occasionally merciless, particularly about other expats, and she did an impression of a German man at our gym that could reduce me to tears in a public place. Nobody warns you that this is the thing that gets you. Nobody arrives in Thailand braced against being made to laugh at 7 in the morning. The second is that she was competent in a way I found deeply restful. She handled the landlord, the immigration photocopies, the motorbike registration, the electrician, the entire administrative surface of my life in a country whose paperwork I could not read, and she did it fast and without fuss, and never once made me feel stupid about it. And if you have spent 31 years being the competent one in every room, being looked after like that is a drug I had no tolerance for whatsoever. And the third is that she was, with my body, patient in the way that mattered. I had a hip that failed in 2024 and 11 weeks on a stick, and she adjusted everything, the pace of the walks, the height of the chair, without discussion or commentary, and there is no version of my life in Ohio in which that hip did not simply mean 11 weeks alone in a house. Put those 3 things beside a temple plaque with another man's name on it, and tell me which way the scale goes. I have had 14 months, and I still cannot tell you. I have stopped believing there is a correct answer, and starting to suspect that the demand for one is a specifically male affliction that this country punishes with great efficiency. So here is the argument I built, and I want to lay it out honestly, because every man watching this who is currently inside one of these has built some version of it, and I would like him to hear his own reasoning in another man's mouth. Argument 1. She left the bar. Within 4 months, she left, and she never went back, and I verified this in the small dishonorable ways available to a suspicious man, and it was true. Hal's statistics, I reasoned, described women in the system. Ratri had exited the system. Argument 2. She never asked me for anything. Not once, not ever. Not in 3.5 years. And I want to be precise, because this is the load-bearing beam of the whole structure. I began sending 35,000 baht a month in 2022 because she had left her income for me, and it was self-evidently my responsibility. I raised it to 45,000 in 2023 because prices went up and because I wanted to. I paid 120,000 for her mother's cataract surgery and diabetes management because I was asked nothing and offered everything. I bought gold 3 times, about 180,000 baht in total, at Songkran and 2 birthdays. I bought a motorbike, 68,000. And across 2023 and 2024, I sent 600,000 baht toward the family house, being built in Buriram, in installments, each one initiated by me, after she mentioned, in passing, without emphasis, how the work was going. Never asked. That was my proof. Argument 3, and this is the one I am most ashamed of. I am not like the others. I did not come here for this. I was an engineer with a pension and a rational mind, and the men in Hal's statistics were lonely men who wanted to be lied to, and I did not want to be lied to. And therefore, you can see the shape of it, can't you? You can see exactly where the fault is. Therefore, the statistics could not describe me. I had voted myself an exception on the grounds that I understood the data. In 31 years of process control, I never once let a system tell me it was fine because it felt fine. I applied that discipline to boilers and reactors and pumps, and I did not apply it to the only thing in my life that could actually hurt me. And if you want the whole confession in one line, that is it. I should say something about the other men, because there were other men, not hers, mine, the ones at the tables, and their behavior across those 4 years is the single strangest social phenomenon I have encountered in this country. There were at least 4 men in my orbit in Jomtien who I now believe knew, or strongly suspected, the shape of my situation, because it is a small beach and Thai social networks are not discreet, and the woman at our breakfast place knows more about all of us than any of us knows about ourselves. Not one of them said a word, and I have thought hard about why, and I have concluded it is not cowardice, and it is not cruelty. It is that every man at that table has either been where I was or is afraid he still is, and the etiquette that has grown up around that fear is absolute. You do not tell a man his business, because if telling were permitted, then being told would also be permitted, and none of them can afford to be told. One of them, a Scot named Ian, came about as close as the code allows. This was 2023, when he asked me, apropos of nothing, whether Ratri ever went up north on her own, and I said yes, for her mother, and he said aye, right, and changed the subject, and I remember being mildly annoyed. That was the whole warning. That was a man risking a friendship to slide a note under a door, and I stepped over it without breaking stride. Since it happened to me, I have watched myself do the same thing twice to other men. Twice, since March of last year, with the full knowledge of everything I am telling you, and both times I said nothing, and I understood in the silence afterward exactly what Ian had been feeling. It is not that we think you won't listen, it is that we know precisely how good the argument is that you have built, because we wrote the same one, and there is no sentence available to a man in a plastic chair that beats 4 years of somebody handing you a towel when you come out of the water. There was a fourth argument, and I left it out of the list above because it is the one that actually did the work, while the other 3 were doing the talking. It was this. I was 70. I had, on the actuarial tables I had absolutely looked up, somewhere between 8 and 14 good years. Years with a working hip and a clear head and the capacity to swim 200 meters and want dinner. Not 30. 8 to 14. And a man who has understood that number in his body, rather than on paper, begins to make a different class of decision, and I would ask the 50-year-olds in the comments to hold their certainty for a couple of decades before spending it. When you are 70, the cost of being wrong about a woman is measured against a denominator that is no longer theoretical, and 3.5 years of breakfasts represents a meaningful percentage of everything you have left. So the fourth argument went, even if Hal is right, even if the statistics do describe me, what exactly is the alternative use of this time? The empty house in Toledo? The 4 o'clock winter dark? I never said this argument out loud to anybody, not once in 4 years, because said out loud it sounds like a man agreeing to be robbed. But it is the true floor underneath the other three, and I have since heard versions of it from 3 different men at that plastic table, always late in the evening, always phrased as a joke. I am not sure it is wrong, even now. That is what I most want to convey about being on the inside of one of these. The reasoning is not stupid. The reasoning is frequently better than the reasoning of the men who mock it. The flaw is never in the logic. It is in the one input nobody audits, which is the assumption that you would rather know. Now, the village. I had been asking to visit for 3.5 years. The answers were never refusals. They were always circumstances. The road was bad in the rains. Her mother was unwell, and the house was unfinished, and it would be shameful to receive me. Her son was in exams. COVID. Then after COVID, the uncle's illness. Each reason was individually plausible, and I accepted all of them. And I want to point out, because this is the sort of thing that only becomes visible from the far end, that a man who notices drift for a living was given 14 separate deferrals across 41 months and never once plotted them on the same line. The invitation finally came in early 2025 for the house blessing ceremony, and I drove up the day before, and I turned off the highway at Nang Rong onto a red dirt road at about 4 in the afternoon, and I saw the house from perhaps 200 meters away, and I want to describe what happened in my chest as precisely as I can, because it was not suspicion. It was arithmetic arriving before emotion could get its coat on. The house was 2 stories. Tiled roof, rendered and painted, glazed windows, a concrete carport with a car under it, a proper wall around the plot with a metal gate. In Buriram in 2025, that house is 1.8 to 2.2 million baht, and I know that with confidence, because I had spent 2 years sending money toward it, and had of course researched what things cost, because I research what things cost. I had sent 600,000, and I sat in that pickup on a dirt road with my hands on the wheel and the engine running, and I did the only piece of process control I performed on this entire system in 4 years. I identified a discrepancy of approximately 1.4 million baht, and I understood, in the way you understand a gauge reading that cannot be explained by anything you know about the plant, that there was an input into this system that I had not been told about. And then the gate opened and her mother came out, and I have to tell you about that too, because the next 4 hours were among the warmest I have experienced in this country, and I refuse to flatten them. May Bunmi is 68, 4'11", with the cataract-cleared eyes I had paid for, and she took both my hands in the driveway and would not let go, and she had cooked since morning. There were maybe 30 people in and around that house by evening, cousins, neighbors, the aunt who runs the shop, a monk who came for the blessing at dusk. Ratri's nephew Aof, 19, with school English and enormous kindness, appointed himself my translator, and did not leave my side once, and I was walked around that village like a visiting dignitary, and I was fed until I begged, and an old man I never got the name of showed me his fighting cocks with total seriousness for 20 minutes. Nobody performed anything for me, nobody could have. Villages that size cannot maintain a performance for a stranger across 4 hours, and neither can grandmothers. That warmth was real, and I have kept it, and it makes everything that follows harder rather than easier, which is I suppose why most men telling this story leave it out. The front room had a wall of photographs, because they all do. I stood in front of it while Aof got me a drink, and I went along it the way you do, smiling, looking for the ones with me in them, and there were 3, and one was framed better than the others, and my chest did something complicated at that. And then, at the left-hand end, there was a photograph of Ratri, May Bunmi, and T at a temple, all in their good clothes, and standing beside them was a European man of perhaps 65, pale, in a short-sleeved shirt, with his hand resting on T's shoulder in the specific way a hand rests on a child's shoulder when it has done so before. And the thing that told me what I needed to know was not the man. It was the boy's height. T is 14 now, and in that photograph he came up to the man's chest. And beside me on the same wall was a photograph of T from Songkran 2 years ago, and I could date the temple picture to within about 18 months. It was not old. It was not from before me. It was from inside my 4 years. I did not say anything. I want to be honest about why. Not strategy, not composure. I could not think of a sentence that would not detonate a house blessing ceremony in front of 30 people who were feeding me. So I kept walking, and about an hour later the monk did the blessing, and the family took me to see the temple's new pavilion, which the village had put up in 2023, and on the pillar at the entrance, there was a donor plaque in Thai and English, the way there always is, listing the families who paid for it. And Ratri's family was on it, and the entry read, in English underneath the Thai, the family of Kun Ratri and Mr. P. Anderson. Aof read it out to me in his careful school English before he understood what he was reading, and then he stopped, and then he said, "This is old, I think." And then he looked at his shoes, and he was 19 years old, and had been kind to me all evening, and I put my hand on his shoulder and said it was fine, and asked him about his university plans, and we walked back, and that was the moment I stopped being able to pretend I did not know what I knew. The last piece arrived at dinner, and it arrived from the least guilty person in the province. T is a big, cheerful 14-year-old who plays football, and who had been circling me all evening, with the specific energy of a boy who wants to show an adult something. What he wanted to show me was his phone. It was a good phone, better than mine, and he was proud of it, and he unlocked it in front of me to show me a football video, and the lock screen photograph was him and a man on a beach, with his arm around the boy's shoulders, and both of them laughing, and it was not me, and it was not Jomtien. The sand was wrong, the light was wrong, it was somewhere on the Andaman side. And T, who had no idea, who has never in his life had a reason to think about any of this, said the man's name in the friendly offhand way a kid says the name of an adult who is around, and then went back to the football video. He was not hiding anything, because he had never been told there was anything to hide. And that is the moment I felt the actual floor go, not on the dirt road with the arithmetic, but at a dinner table with a boy showing me his phone. The understanding that I was not the secret being kept from these people. I was one of the things they had been told about and had absorbed and had made room for, and everyone in that house had been unfailingly kind to me all evening, and none of them had lied to me, because it had not occurred to them that they were required to. There was one more thing that night, and I have to include it, because leaving it out would make this a cleaner story, and a false one. Around 10, when most people had gone, May Bunmi took me into the back room and got out a shoebox. In the shoebox were every card I had ever written to Ratri. I write cards, it is a habit from my mother, and a printed photograph of me and Ratri at a waterfall in Chanthaburi in 2022, and a hospital wristband from my dengue admission, which I did not know she had kept, and which I could not look at for very long. And May Bunmi talked at me for maybe 3 minutes in Thai with great feeling, and Aof translated about half of it, and the half he translated included the fact that when my daughter had cancelled her visit in 2024, Jenna cancelled, work, it was nothing. I was fine about it. Ratri had cried for 2 days. I did not know that. There was no advantage to be gained by anyone from a shoebox in a back room in Buriram, and no audience for the crying. And I have turned that over for a year now, looking for the angle in it, and I have not found one. And I have decided I am not going to keep looking. 2 things can be true. That is the whole education of my 70s. I lay awake that night on a mat in the front room under a ceiling fan and did what I should have done in 2022, which was assemble the record. Not to catch her, just to see the shape. 41 months. In that time she had been away from Jomtien for what I would now estimate at 11 of them. In blocks. Never suspicious blocks. Always 3 weeks here for her mother. 10 days there for a cousin's wedding. A month when T was sick. During those blocks, she messaged me daily and warmly, and I never doubted a thing. The gaps in my own money. The months when I was in Ohio for Jenna's surgery in 2023, 5 weeks. The 2 trips home for Christmas. mapped onto some of her absences with a tidiness I could no longer unsee. The house had taken 2 years, and had cost roughly 3 times what I had put into it. There was a Norwegian or Danish name on a temple pillar. There was a man on a beach on the Andaman side with his arm around her son. And here is what struck me hardest at 3 in the morning under that fan. Not one single element of this contradicted anything she had ever told me. She had never said she was faithful. I had never asked. In 3.5 years, and I checked this obsessively in the weeks after, going back through every message we had ever exchanged, which is the closest thing to self-harm I have ever done. I never once asked her whether there was anyone else, because to ask would have been to admit that Hal's statistics might describe me, and my entire emotional architecture depended on them not doing so. She did not deceive me. I outsourced the deception to myself and kept her hands clean, and she let me. And whether letting me is a sin is a question I have genuinely not resolved. Let me do the money out loud, because this channel is worth nothing if the numbers stay vague, and because the number itself is going to surprise people in the wrong direction. Across 3.5 years I sent, gave, or spent on Ratri and her family a total of 2,280,000 baht. At the rates I converted at, that is a little over 65,000 US dollars. Monthly support, 35 then 45,000, 1,430,000. The house installments, 600,000. Her mother's eyes and diabetes management, 120,000. Gold on 3 occasions, 180,000. And before anybody writes it in the comments, yes, I know what happens to the gold, and no, I did not check, and I am not going to start now. The motorbike, 68,000. Set against a starting position of $340,000 and a Social Security payment that covers my own living costs entirely, this did not ruin me. I want to be very clear about that, because the genre trains you to expect ruin, and the absence of ruin is precisely what makes this category of story so hard for men to see while they are inside it. I am not broke. I am not going home. I lost about 19% of my capital across 4 years, and I got, in exchange, 3.5 years of the best daily life I have had since my 30s. And if you put that to me as a transaction on paper, I might well sign it again. The damage was never financial. The damage is that I spent 4 years being a slightly different man than I believed I was. A man who was being managed, kindly and competently, inside a structure he had been warned about in month 1. And there is no line on any statement for that. And it is the only figure in this entire story that I cannot convert. There is a whole dimension to this I have not touched, which is Ohio. My daughter Jenna knew Ratri existed and had spoken to her twice on video calls, briefly, politely, both women being kind to a man in the middle. What Jenna did not know, and does not know as I record this, is any of the numbers. Not the monthly support, not the house, not the $65,000. And I have examined that omission carefully, because it is the closest thing to a lie I told in this whole affair, and here is what I found underneath it. I was not hiding a woman from my daughter. I was hiding an arithmetic from a 44-year-old woman in Columbus, who, in about 15 years, is going to inherit whatever is left, and who had, in 2023, when I flew back for her surgery, said one sentence to me in a hospital corridor that I have thought about ever since. She said, "Dad, are you happy over there, or are you just further away?" I said happy, and it was true. And it was also the most convenient true thing I have ever said, because it closed a conversation that would otherwise have continued into territory I had no answers for. Since March, I have told her some of it. Not all. Not yet. And I notice that I am rationing the truth to her in almost exactly the way I now understand Ratri was rationing it to me, which is not a comfortable observation to arrive at in your 70s. Ration the truth kindly enough and for long enough, and you will eventually be unable to distinguish it from care. That is the sentence I would put on the wall of every expat bar in this country if they would let me. We drove back to Jomtien together 2 days later, 500 kilometers, and I asked her about 160 kilometers in, with my eyes on the road. I asked how many. She did not answer for a long time. long enough that I stopped expecting an answer. And then she answered a different question, which turned out to be the real one, and I am going to give it to you as close to her words as I can hold them. She said, I am 37. She said, I have maybe 10 more years when someone will help me, and my mother has diabetes, and my son has 6 more years of school, and then university, if he is clever. And there is no pension, Wayne. There is nothing. There is nobody. She said, if I have one man and he goes home, or he dies, or his family calls him back, or he just stops, then everything stops. She said the word for it, and Aoff would have translated it as security. And then she said, in English, the sentence I will be carrying to my grave. You have $300,000. I have 3 men. It is the same thing. And I drove for a long time after that without saying anything, because she was right, and because I had spent 31 years professionally managing risk in systems that could not be allowed to fail, and I had never once considered that a woman from a Buriram village with no capital and a 14-year-old boy was running the same discipline I was, with the only instruments available to her, and that the entire moral outrage of my position depended on my never noticing that. My portfolio was in Vanguard. Hers had names and faces and birthdays she remembered. I had judged her for diversifying while I sat on a diversified account and called it prudence. The 4 months between the truck and the coffee shop were the worst of it, and nobody films those either, so let me. I did not confront, accuse, or leave. I did something far more corrosive, I continued. We went on exactly as before. Breakfast at the place near Soi 5, the market on Sundays, and I said nothing while I conducted, privately, a surveillance operation on a woman I had already been told the truth by. I went back through 3.5 years of messages, every one, in order, across 9 evenings, building a timeline of her absences, and I want to describe what that does to a person, because it is the thing I would most want to spare the next man. It is not that you find evidence, it is that you destroy the archive. Every genuinely lovely message from 2022 became, in that reading, a data point with a timestamp, and once you have read 400 tender things as evidence, you cannot ever read them as tender things again. I burned the entire good half of my own life in that apartment across 9 nights, and she was in the next room, and the thing she was guilty of had already been fully disclosed to me in a truck on a highway 2 months earlier. There was nothing left to find. I was not investigating her by then. I was punishing myself with paperwork, because the paperwork felt like control, and control was the last thing I still owned. By July, I had a document and no relationship left inside myself to apply it to, and I asked her for coffee, and I want you to notice, because I noticed, far too late, that she said yes immediately and arrived early and looked, when she sat down, relieved. I did not end it that day. It took 4 months and it was not dramatic, and the actual ending was small and happened in a coffee shop and consisted mostly of me finally asking the questions I should have asked in 2022, and her answering all of them, without defense, and both of us understanding that the thing that was ending was not the relationship, but a fiction that only one of us had ever been maintaining. She had been, on her own terms, straight with me the whole time. I had been the author of my own version. The last thing she said in that coffee shop was that I had been kind to her son, and she cried, and I do not know how to weigh that against a temple plaque, and I have stopped trying to do the weighing, because the weighing is what kept me stupid for 4 years. The belief that these facts had to resolve into a single verdict, that she was either sincere or strategic, that the good years were either real or a setup. They were both. It is not a contradiction. It was only ever a contradiction inside a man who needed a clean answer more than a true one. I told Hal about a week after that coffee, on a Tuesday, having rehearsed it on the walk down and abandoned the rehearsal entirely on arrival. 79 years old, same plastic table, and I laid the whole thing out. The house, the plaque, the boy's phone, what she said in the truck, and I braced for the kindest possible version of, "I told you so." And Hal drank about 1/3 of his beer and then said, "Wayne, where do you think I got the statistics?" And that was the whole answer. He was not passing on forum wisdom in my first month. He was handing me his own autopsy, 20 years old, and I had heard it as a lecture from a man who had never been where I was, when in fact it was the only thing he had that he could give away, and I had taken it and filed it under other people, exactly as he knew I would, exactly as he had done when someone handed it to him in 2004. He said one more thing that afternoon. He said the statistics do not stop it happening. They only shorten the part afterwards where you decide you were a fool. Then he asked me what I was going to do about the boy, which was not a question I had expected from him, and which turned out to be the only practical question anybody asked me in the whole of last year, and it is the reason the arrangement I am about to describe exists at all. He was right about that too. It has been 14 months, and I do not think I was a fool. I think I was a competent man who declined to run one diagnostic for 4 years because he was happy and because the reading might have come back wrong. So here is where it sits now, and it is not the ending anybody wants, and it is the true one. I still live in Jomtien, in the same apartment, and I still swim at 7 and come out to a towel I put on the sand myself, which is a smaller thing than it was, and is not nothing. Ratri and I message occasionally, and it is warm, and it is honest, and it is not a relationship. And on the 1st of every month I send 5,000 baht, not to her, to the school in Nang Rong, directly, for T's fees and his football, an arrangement I set up myself, and which everyone involved understands completely, and which will end when he finishes, or sooner, if he tells me to stop. That is the whole transaction now, out loud, at its real size, with nothing underneath it. There is no fiction left in it anywhere. Twice a year the school office emails me a receipt with the boy's name on it and his class, and I keep them in a folder, and I look at them for longer than a receipt warrants. And that is the last honest thing I own from 4 years in which I was, I promise you, genuinely happy for most of it. Last November the office attached a photograph without being asked, T and the school football team, 2nd row, 3rd from the left, grinning at something off camera the way he grinned at that football video across a dinner table in Buriram. And I sat with that on my phone at 7 in the morning on Jomtien beach with my hair still wet, and I discovered that I felt nothing complicated about it at all, not one thing. Which after 14 months of feeling nothing but complicated things struck me as worth reporting to somebody, so I am reporting it to you. If you are 70 and watching this, and you have built an argument for why the numbers do not describe you, I am not going to tell you to leave her. That is not the lesson, and I would not be qualified to give it. I am going to tell you to notice what question you have never asked, in 4 years, and then to go and ask it, tonight, and to understand while you are asking that the reason you never did is not that you trusted her. It is that you already knew, and you had a good life, and you did not want the reading.